Hello, how are you? It's been a while. Randy also says hello. She wants a lot of attention right now. I'm Sasan. This is Proteus. I'm excited to be making another video on the channel. I hope the new season has started out excellently for you. If you're wondering who I am or what this is, I'm Sasan. This is Proteus Debate Academy. We're a YouTube channel that makes videos aimed at competitors and coaches in high school, college, middle school, whatever academic debate. I have a second channel. Last few videos I made were for that, where we talk about like argumentation and persuasion and debate, but for a general audience. That's not this channel. This is Proteus Debate Academy, where we talk specifically about academic debate. And some of the videos, like this series, I guess, that I've started on here. It's not the only kind of video we make. You can look at all the stuff we do. But I've been making some videos about game design and as it relates to debate. Debate is a game, and I think there's it's rare for people to have, especially the people designing the game, to have a great understanding of debate. Of game design. And so I find that really interesting, and I like talking about game design, and I would like to do that today. So what is this video about? Well, I started working with a new school, and it's going well. Thank you for asking. It's still just getting my bearings on who's there and what's going on. And I'm talking to this kid that just went to a tournament, and I was like, "Hey, how's it going? And do you need help with anything?" And one of the things they said to me in so many words is, I'm a K debater, and I like reading psychoanalysis. But a lot of times that just, like, based on my judge or based on like my opponents or whatever, that just isn't what I get to do, and I have to have a LARP round, and I'm just not that experienced in it, and I lose when that happens. And they sort of saw that as like a non-problem, because they're like, yeah, this tournament was weird because like the judges weren't into this, but I think the regular tournaments I'm going to, that's going to be like less of a problem, which like may or may not be true. Who knows? My first instinct, as might be yours, was to consider saying like, well, hey champ, if the thing that you're doing isn't the thing that succeeds, then maybe don't do that thing. But that also, brings up this question of like self-expression. Like, people want to debate a certain way in debate, and that is true in games. People want to play games a certain way, and many games accommodate that. And in fact, that is something that makes the game better, both for that individual, but also makes the quality of the competition better. So in this video, I want to talk about that. There's some things that I want to clarify going in. A build for it's in the title. What is a build? A build is the byproduct of long-term choices that you make in a game, which determine what your immediate choices or what your options are going to be in the future, right? So your build might focus on strength or whatever at the expense of agility, and that will give you the option of lifting something or brute forcing your way through something, but it might remove the option of dodging something, to give you a very broad example. So what we mean by build is just the product of the long-term investments you've made, which then shape what immediate options you have in any given scenario. And when I'm talking about like expressiveness and choice, so like an expressive choice is something that's is a matter of your personal preference, especially if that is in some way like displaying or putting into effect your values and your personal identity, as opposed to like a strategic choice, which is just like what is necessary for you to succeed. And these two things are interrelated. They're not like mutually exclusive. Like everything has an element of self-expression, probably, and everything has an element of strategy, probably. And in fact, that's also what we're going to be talking about. But broadly speaking, like, debate is a game, and we want it to be a good game. And this video is about the role self-expression plays in that, because it can be a factor in what makes a game good. So in this video, we're going to talk about what build variety is in games, and like how games got to have that and how they function in those games. We're going to talk about how that affects the experience of players and how it changes the game itself. We're going to talk about how debaters are themselves like specialized builds, and we're going to talk about circuits and approaches to debate and how they interact with these builds. So let's get started. We're going to start by talking about just role-playing games and just games, and how like builds began to be introduced into just games in general. So we're going way back. So you start with checkers 5,000 years ago, and over the course of, like 2,400 years later, you develop chess. And they mostly have things in common, ostensibly speaking. They're on 8x8 grids. They have a bunch of pieces that can capture each other, right? Like, depending on how you move a piece, you make your opponent lose a piece. And they're both games where you take turns one at a time, and they're purely strategic games. They don't have any element of chance. They don't have any element of like skill. That like strategic skill, sure, but what I mean is they don't have like, and in this part, if you're stronger, you win, right? Like baseball, for example, like speed and strength and stuff like that plays a role, not in chess or in checkers, where they diverge. And what the innovations that chess makes in games and in gaming is, yeah, sure, they diverge in the number of pieces, and the win condition, instead of it being like you capture all the pieces, there's just specifically you're trying to capture the king. But the major development, the major innovation is that there's different pieces that do different stuff. They work in different ways. They move in different ways. They attack in different ways. The Persian word for chess is shatranj, and that I think etymologically from some language, an Indian language maybe, I think means like four roles or like four something, right? And I guess that's like referring to like bishops and knights and rooks and queens. So I guess like pawns like don't count and the king doesn't count. But the entire concept of the game is built around that there's different pieces that do different stuff, and they're all built on war type of troops, right? You have knights, those are obviously knights. Bishops in the original game in India and still in Farsi, like those are elephants. Rooks, I think, were originally supposed to be chariots. And I don't really know what the queen is. Like, is that a thing that used to happen? Like, the queen would just get out there, and like, yeah, I don't know what that's about, or like why they. I'm sure it was something else at some point. But then what happens is in the 1780s. After centuries of people using chess as a way of like exploring war strategy in the abstract, people were just like, well, why don't we just make like a cannon? why don't we like make actual war stuff, and like instead of having it on an 8x8 grid, let's just put it on like a fake battlefield. And like, here's like a bunch of little people, and here's like a cannon, and let's like actually practice war strategy using a game. And another thing that they introduced into wargaming, after they directly developed it from chess, was elements of chance. They used dice because it's not a given that like if you put a cannon somewhere and you try shooting at someone, you're going to hit them. So they tried to reflect the relative probability of success for a thing with like dice rolls. And this wasn't like a game that people played at home until 1913, when H.G. Wells publishes the first like commercially sold war game. That's the guy who wrote War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. So that's a neat little fun fact. And 50, 60 years later, wargaming has become a very popular hobby, and people have started to do a whole bunch of varieties on it. And some of them have started to introduce elements of like high fantasy, you know, like Lord of the Rings was very popular in the 50s. I think Conan the Barbarian was probably out by then. And one guy, Gary Gygax, with some help, comes up with Dungeons and Dragons, which is the first game in what we now call tabletop role-playing games. Cool developments here galore. So what happens there is that instead of it being like, here's a cannon, here's a cavalry guy, here's infantryman. I don't know that many kinds of soldiers. There's a huge variety of classes, right? Of like a fighter or a wizard or whatever, but also each of these is further specialized to the point where no two are likely to be exactly the same builds, right? But in addition to that, where a game before would have a player control an army with a variety of troop types, Dungeons and Dragons took the troop types and made each individual unique type a different player. And they would come together and they would form like that army together. They're a party now. And they also balance the game because they want people to play a variety of different roles, not only because it makes the game more mechanically interesting, but because it makes self-expression possible, right? Like, if I am looking at the game Dungeons and Dragons and like a rogue stands out to me, I'm like, ooh, that sounds interesting. I can sneak, and I can hide, and I can pick locks, and I can do like sneak attacks and stuff like that. And then I go to play the game, and it's just like, no, people wear armor, so like none of that works. Like, oh no, people, it's like well lit all the time, so people like can just see you, right? It wouldn't make playing that character viable. If just the fighter was the best build, then every party would be incentivized to just be 4 or 5 fighters. So what they do is they balance the game, and they make it so like, okay, fighters are really good at doing damage to one enemy, but there's instances where you want to do damage to multiple enemies at once, and maybe wizards are really good at that. And there's instances where you want to heal yourself, or you want to heal others, and like maybe clerics are good at that. And there's all sorts of things that aren't immediately in combat, like having diplomacy with other people, or sneaking around, or whatever, right? And so different characters fill different roles, and the scenarios you're put into are designed to require a variety of things to be done. So that is how they make sure that different players have a lot of options for what they are, and also like the game itself calls for a variety of builds to be in the game. Then something interesting happens, which most directly relates to what we're going to be talking about in debate, which is a few years after that, a game called Ultima comes out. A video game. It's not the first role playing video game. There were, I think, two before that. But the previous games they were based on Dungeons and Dragons, but they kind of had that army approach where one player, you at your like Apple II computer, are controlling a party of like 5 characters. So you go to a situation, and when a lock needs to be picked, you use the thief, and when dude needs to be set on fire, you use the wizard. But Ultima is a game where it had the Dungeons and Dragons classes, but you played one character. The world itself, the game itself, like doesn't change. You're still going in the same dungeon and fighting the same creatures or whatever, but your character could be vastly different, and they would be able to do things other characters can't, and they would be not able to do things other characters can. So the game itself has to take into account that there is a large disparity potentially between what a player will be able to do in a given scenario based on the choices that they made leading up to that scenario, which sounds obvious to us now, but like there weren't really games like that before. And that has a lot of like interesting implications that we're going to explore. The last thing I'll say about just traditional games and like build variety is just the effect that that's had on those games. So the first effect that it's had is that it adds depth to games. The most obvious way that a variety of builds adds depth to a game is that you have a lot of different choices you can make. But it goes beyond that, right? Like, let's say you want to be a fighter in a game where every character is a fighter that works exactly the same way you do. There's, I'm sure, a lot of strategic elements that you can still have in that, right? Like boxing. Boxing is you do basically the same thing the other guy's doing. But even if you're going to be a fighter regardless, right? If your opponent is a wizard, how you use the skills you have and approach with the same build you have needs to change, because they could be much farther away and able to hit you. If they are a cleric, they can heal themselves. If they're a rogue, they can hide, right? So other players having more options changes how you approach the game, even if you are picking the same option as you would if that was the only option. The other thing is that it obviously allows a lot more self-expression. And again, like that being in relation to like your identity and your values and just what you think would be cool and fun. And it also adds a lot more layers of strategy, because what I was describing before, like that depth, that games have like execution, and they have strategy, and like in a video game, for example, an execution is like how well you can react to things, how quickly you can dodge, how precise your movements are or whatever. But strategy might just be like big picture stuff, and there's a lot of interesting instances in games, whether it's video games or card games or whatever, where really competitive players didn't have the same physical skill as others. They just made really good strategic choices that other people hadn't considered and weren't ready for, and that allows people to be in the space competitively without necessarily being the fastest, strongest, whatever. And also I think it's just easier for people who are trying to understand the game to understand it, right? Like I have a slide here, right? Like when you think of like when we try to depict, there was a soccer cartoon that I liked when I was a kid. I lived in Iran. They had this on It was the only cartoon that was ever on TV. It was on like Friday afternoons. In Farsi, it was called Futbolist, which means the soccer players. But it's an anime. I think it's called Captain Tsubasa. It doesn't matter. It's soccer players, and whenever they go against another team, that team always has like a shtick. They always have like a thing that they do, right? And I think that is a interesting way of understanding like strategy. Whereas when things are very similar, you have to get really, really nuanced. So, like for instance, I think there's a reason why when we have like depictions of like a tournament of some kind in movies or books or whatever, like we tend to depict it like in Dragon Ball here, where you don't have to know anything about who these characters are. Like, you understand one is small and one is very big and lumbering and strong. And you might even guess based on this image, like what these people, how this fight might go. Like, there might be like 2 or 3 options, right? But you can kind of imagine what that matchup is. But with something like fencing, like, it's really difficult to intuitively distinguish. Like, you would really need to understand fencing to look at this and be like, here's the nuances of how they approach the game. And I think a game being easy to understand makes it more interesting to watch, but also easier to learn. Like, if we go back here, UFC, Ultimate Fighting Championship started as somebody had an idea of like, well, we have all these different martial arts forms and we've been talking for years about like which one's the best. Why don't we just literally put these people in a ring and have them fight each other and see which one is the best? And this is like a poster for the 4th time they had that tournament. If you look at it, it's like ninjutsu versus jujitsu versus taekwondo. But that's not the way UFC is now. In UFC now, you just have like MMA. You just have this. There's differences in people's background and training and their approach, but generally speaking, 2 fighters seem similar enough that like it's really hard to distinguish the difference. Whereas before it would have been much more like this, where you can be like, one guy's a wrestler and the other guy is a boxer. And I think one sport that has done a really good job of like maintaining that spirit, and where that spirit's really core to the audience's engagement with it, is Robot Wars. Robot Wars, as far as I'm aware, has not reached a place where like the meta is just set, where it's like every robot is the same shape, it has the same functions, and the winner is just decided by who literally did the better welding and engineering and like had access to the more expensive parts. I think the people who like this sort of thing would think that's a worse version of the game than each time there's a competition, you see these completely different approaches to building a robot, and then you get to see how the interaction between those two plays out in a unique way that you haven't seen an interaction between 2 robots play out before. So now let's go into what we were alluding to before, this relationship between strategy and self-expression. So in any given like game, right, you are trying to achieve a win condition. Let's say, like, let's describe it as you're trying to solve a problem. So each build is going to have like in a there's different ways of having a game. If you have a game where there's just right answers and wrong answers in terms of your build, then this is essentially what the game looks like. The game becomes about, well, there's many choices you could have made with your build, but you made the wrong choice. Essentially, the game is about knowing what build you should make. This doesn't tend to be a terribly engaging kind of game. I mean, I think some people are into some version of this, but generally speaking, this doesn't have like a lot of people dying to play it because of all the benefits that we talked about earlier of build variety in games. Like you allow build variety in game, but you're directly punishing build variety in game. You only want one build in the game. You just allowed people to be wrong. The other option, one of the other options, is that there's any number of builds that all do different stuff, but they all function the same way. They all solve the same problem in the same way. We could call this the illusion of choice, right? Like, hey, do you want to shoot lightning out of your hands, or do you want to shoot ice out of your hands, or do you want to shoot fire out of your hands, or do you want to shoot poison out of your hands? Well, what's the difference between those things? Well, no, they all do 10 damage per second, and they have the same exact range. You stand in the same place, you do the same thing. It ceases to matter, really, which you picked, right? Maybe, like, I wanted green, so I guess I'm going with poison, right? But the benefits we start to see of that variety and that the sort of interactions between those things, those start to get lost. And how the game plays out for you uniquely because of the long-term choices you made, that also gets lost. Then we have, a variety of solutions. This tends to be what people want in games and the games that are considered the best role-playing games. Fallout or Dark Souls or whatever, like what they more Fallout. But what they will do is that there's all sorts of different approaches to who you can be in this game, and any given problem will have multiple solutions that are all unique from each other, and which you can access despite the number of choices you made. Now, this is hard to pull off. This is hard to pull off because you can't make 100 solutions, 100 unique solutions for 100 unique approaches. And it requires like a lot of control and being good at design, but also being able to control the exact scenario that players are in and so on. But I think we can look at games sort of like on this spectrum, right? Where on the left is games where there just is right and wrong choices, and your build essentially functions as like a difficulty setting, where if you make the correct choice, then the game's just really easy, and if you make any of the incorrect choices, the game's basically impossible. Up to like games where it really doesn't matter what you choose, it's pretty much just a different color laser coming out of your hands, right? Where the game's basically the same no matter what. And then stuff in the middle. Don't play My Ferrari. That's just there. Yeah, that game was it's a pen and paper role playing game made by someone who's wildly racist. I just think it's the guy who made that game was like, I want to make a role playing game where weapons function the way they do in real life. So like if a spear just is the best weapon to use in combat, it's just the best weapon to use in the game. And like that seems good in concept, but what the game essentially turns into is figuring out what this wildly racist person just like thought was the best weapon, and then like doing that, right? Elden Ring is a great example of there's lots and lots of different things that you can do, and there's lots of different approaches you can take in combat to solve a problem. And then Skyrim is more like on the end of the spectrum where there's a lot of choices you can make, but how you're approaching any problem is there's not a lot of diversity in it. So I actually put together a couple videos to demonstrate this. So instead of like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, all made by the same people, same series of games, so to speak. I chose Demon Souls because Demon Souls is a little bit more on the side of some choices are just more correct than others, and some choices just make the game easier or harder. I picked a bunch of videos of people who are doing blind playthroughs. They've never played this game before. They've maybe played similar games to it, and they kind of understand how these kinds of games work, but they've never been in this scenario that they're about to be in near the beginning of the game. It's like the second level of the game, and it's the first time they're coming across a situation where what their build is has a significant impact on how easy the situation they're in is going to be. And you're going to see people take different approaches. Some of them will be like, well, I'm just going to change my build. Some of them are going to adapt their build. Some of them are going to just not figure it out or just struggle. So let's take a look.
Interesting. I'm offline, so I was like, these messages are obviously developer left, so I just thought I would have a look. The next enemy is susceptible to thrusting attacks. Game's given me hints. They are yeeting boulders. The next enemy is susceptible to magic attacks. I don't have any of those. I have a spear, but I put it in my inventory. Yeah, they're thick-skinned little buggers, aren't they? Look at their faces. So, magic and thrusting, huh? Winged spear. So I do my thrusting attack. I don't have any magic, so that'll do. Oh man. Yeah, okay. It's definitely a good thing that we... It's a good thing that we leveled up Dex a little bit to wield his spear.
The next enemy is susceptible to thrusting attacks. Okay, oh, there's a way to go that way as well. Oh, lovely. The next enemy is susceptible to magic attacks. Well, that's not what we're doing. Fucking hell, you've got some health. When they said the next enemy's weak to piercing, did they mean these guys? Oh, they super did. Okay.
Oh my god, I can't believe he didn't die! Are you shitting me? Whoa. Oh my god, this is horrible. What's up with these guys? Guys, I'm so creeped out. Oh my god, they're really powerful. Should I not have come here or something at this stage, do we think?
Oh, read message, thank you. The next enemy is susceptible to thrusting attacks. They're throwing rocks out there. The next enemy is susceptible to magic attacks. Okay. Oh, there's some. Should we not? Oh my god. Tough. Do they want us grinding back at the other place? Yeah, we're toast already. Stupid.
So, there is some. For one thing, I wasn't able to find anyone who was doing a blind playthrough of the game and had magic at that point. But what you can see there is, am I like glitching out? I think it's all right. What you can see there is that this is considered a deep game, because what your experience is in that place and how you're fighting those people will differ based on whether you use a specific weapon, and the weapons have a large variety of differences which significantly matter. Like, for example, one sword will have a thrusting attack and another sword will not, and that makes those two swords have a significant difference because thrusting attacks are strong against some enemies, right? A game like Skyrim, like whether you're swinging an axe axe, or you're swinging a club, or you're swinging a sword, or you're shooting fire, or you're shooting a bow, like that rarely has a significant difference. So you'll see in this like 30-second clip I'm about to show you that this is again like near the beginning of the game, like a first like mini boss or whatever that these players are fighting. They have a variety of builds. They've never been here before, and you'll see that like pretty much everyone just stands in front of the thing and mashes the attack button.
Why won't I stop crouching?
I'm just gonna keep swinging. Shot. Ow.
Now, of these games, I would say like Skyrim is probably more self-expressive, but Demon Souls is a little bit more like mechanically rich, and it's a deeper game. And what we want ideally is something in between those. So now let's talk about like more. We've explored the concept and the abstract. Let's talk about debate. So here's like the outcome of a game of Dungeons and Dragons and an outcome of debate. And I put some thought into this, and I think these are all of the factors that affect the outcomes, and I think they're like the direct analogs of each other. So whether something works or succeeds in Dungeons and Dragons is based on the scenario, which in debate is the equivalent to the topic, right? Like, what is the context of the thing that you are making decisions surrounding? There's the player action in Dungeons and Dragons, and then there's your argument in debate. There is game mechanics, where in debate that's the event rules. There is the dungeon master, like the decisions they make and how they enforce the rules and don't enforce the rules and shape things. That of course works in debate with judges. And then in D&D, where we have like chance, where you don't necessarily know ahead of time whether something is going to succeed or not, I think in debate that's where like counter arguments come in. Like obviously with judges and stuff, they may or may not like it, but assuming even like perfect, I use the term like Spock judges in a different video, right? Where they're perfectly analytical and making these robot decisions. Even then, the element of not being able to 100% predict the outcome of something is based on you don't know what your opponent will or will not say. But I want to focus on like this element of player choice, where it's easy to imagine that in debate, like we were talking earlier, what started this, right? I'm talking to this child, and it's like, well, have you tried not being a K debater? Like, is that an option for a lot of debaters? Like, is what they say in a round, how much of a choice can they actually make situationally? Now, I'm not talking about like you're limited by the available evidence, right? That's obviously a limiting factor. But what I mean here is like a skill tree. Like in video games, in some video games, you'll have the option to put points into these like flowcharts. And you'll decide where your focus is. And you have a limited amount of points total so that you can't be good at everything. And what that does is it makes it so, in theory, no two characters are exactly the same. Same thing happens in debate. Now, I did my best here to do like a loose approximation of like the skill tree of debate. This is a huge simplification, and two, like it's just there to give you an idea, right? But you kind of start with one or the other. You start either like traditionally or in circuit, and then you decide, okay, I want to focus more on like lay debate, or I want to focus more on like policy type stuff, or theory or K. And the point that I want to make here is that these trade off with each other, because you have a limited number of years that you're able to be a competitor. You have a limited amount of things that you can practice, rounds that you can get experience from, and it's very difficult to be viably good at everything. Yes, there are some people who are like really good K debaters, but they could still win on case if they wanted to. But I would argue that most people aren't there. Like, most people are statistically, I guess, like halfway through their debate career, right? Like, any given debater is most likely to be in a place where they have put themselves in a position where things outside of their wheelhouse are just not viable options for them to suddenly switch to. And you can kind of like see the effect of this, right? You can tell a debater who's focused on policy, like, why don't you just engage with the K, or vice versa, right? You could tell a K debater, well, why don't you just debate topically? But you can see in games, like, the same short-term choice will have different outcomes based on the build you've created for yourself. So like in Dark Souls here, I keep pointing with the wrong hand. These are two scenarios where a person tries rolling, but based on decisions they made a long time ago and are difficult to change, the outcome of that is very different. So they're not necessarily viable. They've sort of got themselves locked into the choice that they made for themselves. So what do we do? Okay, not even like what do we do in debate, but how do the things that we do in debate to structure our events affect these sorts of outcomes? Well, the first thing that we'll look at is if an event is very rigid, meaning like it has very strict rules on what you can do, and it is judged very consistently. Like judges always follow a very set of rules, and what this does is that there's many things a debater could do, they could say, but really there's just one thing that is rewarded, or at least there's one thing that is most rewarded. And the downsides of this, well, the upside of it is that you get the event that you wanted, right? Like, in theory, as long as you executed on your vision correctly, then you get a debate event that is that. The downside of it is that you stifle innovation, and you also codify problematic norms. Like, that's kind of like what the movie The Great Debaters is about, and like that's what like a lot of like K's are about. Like, basically, if you say like, in debate, you're supposed to seem professional, and what you think counts as professional is basically like you have to talk like a rich white person, then that obviously puts like non-rich, non-white people at a disadvantage, right? Maybe not in a way that you intended, but a thing that is now codified into your event, and also it has like limited applications outside this game, right? It becomes like chess, where like, congrats, you got really good at chess, but that doesn't necessarily help you do other things well, because the thing you got good at functioned in a really contained and controlled way, whereas like real situations aren't contained and controlled that way. The next option is, okay, well, what if the event is flexible, the event is vague? This is the way most American debate events are. Am I still lagging? Am I good? I'm good, I assume. This is the way most American high school debate events are, where the rules are really vague and they're very lax, but each given judge shows up and they might just be like, hey, I don't like this thing, or this is what I want, or I will vote for that. there's a few problems with that. The first is we're putting a lot of power in the hands of judges that we have very, very poor quality control of. I have been making videos on this channel for 6 years, and for all 6 of those years I've said debate is a game where you try to get the judge to circle your name on the ballot, and that means there's no such thing as a judge being wrong or making the wrong decision. Your job is to get them to circle your name. With that said, if we put all of that power in the hands of a judge and we consistently pick judges that make bad decisions, then yeah, we made a game where your job is to convince this guy, but that's a dumb game because it's just a bad set of decisions getting made, right? The other issue you run in here is okay, so you're in a debate, you're a traditional debater. This happens to people all the time, and this is the thing that most upsets debaters in my experience. They go into a round and the judge is just I love spreading and I love Ks and I want you to do it, and you don't do those things and your opponent does. Or something that's happened to my students, they go into a debate round and the judge says, I hate topicality arguments. If you read them, I will vote you down. And then the other side just is not topical. So then what are you supposed to do, right? Or people, you have a strategy, you go in and they're oh, I've never judged before. Or people are you're a K team, and they say I will instantly vote you down if you read a K. And I think that leads to these well, fuck me, I guess, situations, right? Where we talk about judge adaptability, right? You should adapt to the judge, but realistically speaking, can our competitors actually adapt to these things that we throw their way, given that there's long-term stuff that goes into them being in the room, especially in evidentiary debate. Oh, sure, let me just pull out my other case that I had based on this weird judge that I might have gotten. I think there's problems there. Then we have okay, what if the event is lax in the rules and judges were trained to keep an open mind and to be able to understand a large variety of arguments and be able to evaluate each on their own merits and understand how to compare these things in a fair way, right? Like variety of solutions thing, where there isn't necessarily one correct way to win a judge's ballot. It depends on what you want to do and what your opponent wants to do, and given that matchup, you try a thing, and there's a variety of ways of winning a judge's ballot. That's really hard to do, right? How do we make that happen? Do we train all of the judges in how to do that? We talked about how debaters can't adapt to all of these things and evaluate all of these things. We would need just expert judges who are very well trained, and they're I don't know how well that works. And also what would we then be training students in? Is it the judge's job to adapt to the students, or is it the student's job to adapt to a judge? I don't have an answer here. I just think that's what this leaves us with. And then finally, there's the option of universality. What if debates, arguments could seem different from each other, but they were actually all evaluated in a universal way, right? For example, one debater wants to, let's say we're talking about, I don't know, what's the PF topic? Encryption. One debater wants to talk about a nuclear war impact that comes out of ending encryption, adding backdoors or whatever. One debater wants to talk about a very reasonable impact about how this would I don't know, like make people upset or hurt privacy. Maybe they want to take like a values-based sort of like philosophy approach to it. One debater wants to talk about the psychoanalytic implications of it. Another wants to talk about how their opponent's arguments are off topic. And in this scenario, how the argument is evaluated by a judge all funnels through they all function the exact same way. Like what makes these builds work differently is that you need to understand different things to use them. Like a disadvantage has a uniqueness, link, internal link, and impact, and you need to understand what those things and how they function. And a topicality argument has an interpretation, violation, solvency, and voters, and you need to know what those things are and how they function. And a critique has you know, like the thesis and the link and the alternative and the solvency of the alternative, and you need to know what all of those things are, right? What the Kasravi model attempts to do is to say, look, all arguments function off of relevance, accuracy, and significance. So regardless of whether you want to talk about your opponent said a bad word and they should lose, or like this is going to create nuclear war, or somebody's off topic, or this has some like Nietzschean reason why there's something wrong with it, you're going to present your point no matter what the topic is, and you just have to demonstrate that it's relevant to this debate and the judge's decision, it's accurate what you're saying, and that it's significant enough for them to choose it. And I think that makes it so that the distinctions between these approaches become less significant and less like build heavy, so to speak. Like you're still choosing what you want to talk about, but how the argument works isn't something that like somebody is locked out of understanding necessarily, or it's not evaluated in a completely different way based on the type of argument that it is. With that having been said, I don't know that this is like a great, I don't think this makes self-expression better. I think one of the things that debaters really like about these different kinds of debate is that they are separate from each other, and they have unique qualities, and they make for different kinds of rounds. And if everything was just relevance, accuracy, and significance, I mean, everything is relevance, accuracy, and significance. But if everything was just discussed and evaluated in terms of their relevance, accuracy, and significance, then it might make all the variety of arguments feel samey, and that might be a thing that they don't like. And it might be a thing that makes the game less nuanced and less interesting. I don't know. Hey, folks, you've been great. I've been Sasan. Happy to be back. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, does any of what I just said make any sense? Is it interesting? I don't know. All right, thank you.